everyone. I can see the numbers are starting to grow in the audience chat. We've just been getting ourselves all together. Welcome to the co-design session for St. George in the East. I'm really excited this afternoon for what we think is potentially the only live co-design session being done with community, potentially United Kingdom. We think maybe the world. That's my claim. We've got a really exciting programme this afternoon. We've got some architects from Create Streets and some urban designers. We've got community members from St. George in the East, from East London citizens, local mosques, schools, churches. And really what we're trying to do is to design affordable, beautiful homes in the area next to St. George in the East. We're going to quickly run through a very brief presentation, taking you through the history. This isn't the first design session we've been doing. We've been at this since 2019. And then I'll also introduce everyone who we've got on the call. So firstly, myself, David Milner, I'm Projects Director for Create Streets. Hopefully you all know what Create Streets is by now, having joined our conference, but we're essentially a social enterprise and we've got associated charity aiming to make the UK a better place by researching the links between built environment, mental health, well-being, sustainability, and also things about how well you know your neighbours, how much you walk, and how much don't know if I think my audio is just cut out there, but hopefully you heard. Yeah, back in, good, and how well you know your neighbours. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Angus Fraser. So Canon Angus, Reverend Angus Fraser, has worked in the East End churches involved in community organising since 1998. Angus now serves as St. George in the East. His latest book is Inclusive Populism, a little plug there as well for you, Angus. And we've also got Miriam Brittenden, who coordinates the Buxton Leadership Programme and is the community organiser for Shadwell Responds. If you'd like, just sort of pass over first Angus and then Miriam just to say hi, and if you've got anything you'd like to say to everyone.
Hi, actually, Miriam, do you want to go first and say a bit about the run-up, and I'll say a bit about the future?
Yeah, absolutely. David, is that what you're intending us to say now?
That's absolutely right, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to just talk a little bit about the background of I suppose why we're here today. So St. George in the East Church, where I work as a community organiser but I'm a congregation member as well, has a real track record of campaigning with our local community for more affordable housing. Gentrification, overcrowding and homelessness are really huge issues in Hamlets and in Shadwell, where we're based specifically. So just kind of give a bit of background, in 2018, after a 3-year campaign, a group of local Christians from our church and Muslim neighbours and others won a piece of land on Cable Street to make into a community land trust. So that's homes that are designed for and by the local community and stay at a permanently affordable price. And lots of those involved in that campaign are now involved in taking that forward with us today. But we kind of recognise that one housing win and one set of homes is not enough. And we know that we have a lot of space around our church which could be used more effectively. We hope for more affordable housing. So last summer, 2019, we hosted 3 workshops with Create Streets. So members of our church and parish could input their ideas about what they'd like to change about the area and kind of reimagining the space and having the opportunity to design new buildings together. So this kind of comes out of that. We've done, building on that, had some kind of conversations earlier in the year before the pandemic, but this is about revisiting that conversation really. So I'll hand back over to David or Angus.
Yeah, so just to take that story forward, Miriam will be too modest to say this, but during the pandemic, there's been an extraordinarily effective piece of community organising. Really, the housing campaign inevitably stopped. People's priorities were mutual support, food poverty, those very immediate practical issues in lockdown, and out of that has come Shadwell Responds, and that group has been relating and acting, and housing and overcrowding are major issues. And now that we're looking a bit more to the long term, this is the beginning of a restart of thinking about affordable housing on that land, but also throughout this period, there's been another amazing initiative, the Open Table, which is a community of people who are and have been homeless and people who want to build relationships with them. And Shamara takes the lead in that. And that group has been looking at the possibility of temporary accommodation for single homeless people on part of the land we're discussing. So in a sense, this is bringing together those two threads of work. Shadwell Responds, thinking about long-term housing, actually on a site right next to St George's where before the Blitz there was housing, and then the land opposite, where the Open Table team, the single homeless people with whom that team has been building relationship for some years, we're looking at the opportunity for people who have been in hotels and emergency accommodation during lockdown and are now coming back, having temporary housing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Angus. Very quickly, I'm going to ask people just to do quick intros who haven't spoken, who are speakers. So these are the people everyone can see live. We also have a number, I think, sort of between 10 and 15 audience members who, due to the limits of technology, are also involved in the co-design, and we'll be asking them through the course of the afternoon to grab the mic, as it were, step up, say hi, and sort of have their say and tell us, what kind of places should we design. So I'll just pass over to Neda to introduce herself as well.
Thanks, David. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining our session. My name is Neda and I'm an urban designer and researcher with Create Streets. The majority of my work focuses on community-led development, so seeing what role people living in their neighborhoods can step up and start to create their own changes, where the role of the architect or the urban designer is really just to help rather than to impose their own vision. And a lot of the work that we do focuses not just on London, but on the wider UK.
Thank you, Neda. And Robert.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert. I'm an architectural designer at Create Streets, and I've been involved now with a number of projects around England, looking at housing developments and community projects. And yeah, it's very exciting to be here today doing this first digital co-design workshop. And we really hope that the results we see today will be perhaps a model for going forward. So back to you, David.
Thank you, Robert. And Phil, if you wanted to say hi as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Phil Warburton. I live not too far away from the sites we're going to help co-design today. I'm also a community organiser with Citizens UK in Tower Hamlets. I'm really interested in this because I have adult children who grew up in Tower Hamlets, and if they choose, I would love it if they could stay here and have somewhere to rent or buy in the local neighbourhood. So I'm interested in the whole affordable housing agenda. It's because it's important for my children and my friends' children.
Thank you very much, Phil. And then we've also got Shamara.
Hi everybody, it's great to be here. I'm Shamara and I lead the Open Table Homeless Project at St George in the East. I'm particularly interested in this workshop because of Site C and how homeless people can be involved in the co-design as well as being implemented into the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, on our panel, we've got Sarah Emily.
Hello, I'm Sarah Emily. I am the co-chair of the group for building, the steering group for building the 40 truly affordable homes on the Shadwell site next to the DLR. And I've been involved in that campaign since 2015. And I'm really excited and expanding on that work to bring more community design into Shadwell and get more people these homes. It's just been met so many people with an incredible housing need who are very keen to get involved in this process. So this is great.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to do very quick shout outs, sort of first names only, to our community members who are in the audience, and we'll be sort of speaking to them throughout the afternoon. So we've got Trisha, Lorena, Oliver, Annadale, Ray, Afsana, Jim, Janice, Hannah, Gren, and we've got Nural hopefully as well. So hi everyone. Hope you're all in. Firstly, I don't know if you are or not. So fingers crossed you've made it in and past the tech battle which we've all been facing. And we look forward to speaking to you today. So Neda, can you bring up the slides quickly? And what we're going to do is just, conscious that a lot of people won't know what the site is and won't know some of the process and as Miriam has spoken about as well, the previous workshops we've been doing. So myself and Edward and Robert are going to take you through some of the history and some of the backgrounds. If we want to go on to the next slide. So quick agenda, if you can squint and see that. So we've got obviously introductions we're going through, and we're going to give you a little bit of background to some of the community-led work. We heard a bit from Angus and Miriam about some of the further outreach work and shadow response. Maybe we can hear a few more seconds about some of that work, because it's actually incredibly crucial and relevant to the co-design process. Then obviously a little bit delayed, we'll be going through probably from about past for roughly an hour. We're going to be looking at the design of what we're calling Site A, which you'll come and see what it looks like at the moment. Looking at the site and going through some co-design with Robert, with Neda, with myself, where we're going to be building some 3D models and doing some digital sketching as well. We'll have a quick break as well, so we don't have too much death by video talk. And then we're going to be going back onto Site C, where the focus is going to be on temporary accommodation for the homeless, looking at designing this accommodation so that we don't just throw any old accommodation up on Site C. We actually design it with the same principles that we would design homes, which we want to last for 100 years as well. And then we'll do a quick wrap up. We will be a few of us will be speaking tomorrow at 11:15 as well to feed back to the wider conference on some of the designs, and also some potentially some of the drawings that will happen this evening and tomorrow morning, to take all your ideas, which we hear this afternoon, a little bit further and hopefully work it up in some nice images and nice drawings. Thank you, Neda. So intros we've done. We'll move swiftly past that and onto the background of the project. Okay, so the project itself, which Create Streets has been involved in with East London Citizens, was Place Champions. This is a project which we run with local, at the moment, local citizens groups. We've been working with groups in Greenwich, obviously Tower Hamlets, Ealing, and Lewisham as well. We're trying to help to design, but also to train local communities around issues to do with urban design, regeneration, how they can influence these processes so they don't feel like development's being done at you. You're actually taking a leadership role and deciding what and where you would like to see development in your own local community. In the team, we've obviously got Create Streets and Tower Hamlets Citizens for this one, but actually since we started this, the net has been thrown far wider, and we've started to bring in all sorts of different interested parties, local institutions and organisations as well. We're doing this primarily to look at affordable homes, around which we're going to call Site C, which is housing which did used to exist just to the southeast of the church. But we're also looking at what can we do temporarily for another site across the road to the south from St George in the east, as I said, for affordable homeless housing initially, and then who knows in the medium term as well. Here's a very quick timeline. I sort of won't go through everything, but you can see we've had a series of different visits, project introductions. We've visited places in Bethnal Green and Bow. We've looked at other churches that have created new affordable homes and cafes and community shops nearby. We've had some walking tours with Historic England. We've been engaging then with the wider community with Miriam and Angus. We've had further community workshops early in 2020. Then obviously we had the sort of COVID situation, which meant all the focus was then back onto the shadow response, which I know Miriam and Angus, you've been working on very hard. And then that sort of left us here in September with the co-design workshop. So we've got a vast amount of learning, and we'll go through that very, very quickly in a second, that's led up to this point. But what we want to do is really keep this momentum going, reboot the design process as we sort of have emerged from lockdown, albeit digitally, because ultimately we want to make this a reality. And as we can have as many drawings as possible and as many designs as possible, but it's about kind of getting it to that next stage and getting it to where we can actually see these things happening physically. So Neda, I think I might shut up for a little bit and pass over to you and sort of just let you introduce some of the different sites and give people an idea of actually, where is this site, where is the area, and what does it look like?
Fantastic. Thanks, David. So here is a map which gives you an idea of the sizes of the sites, where they're located. This black outline here is the St. George in the East Church, located in East London. It's located in an area that has quite a large dual carriageway crossing through. And the main three sites that we're looking at are the grounds in front of the church. These grounds used to have housing, which were subsequently demolished after the Second World War. Site B is where the current leisure centre is located, and the community have expressed an interest previously in redeveloping the site while still providing that leisure centre and that space for the community. And Site C is another quite large site, which has the potential to be used for a meanwhile use, which just means that a temporary structure could go there, which could, for example, what the community have expressed is to house homeless people who are living in the area. And so the three sites, I think, are of quite a good size, and quite a lot of things can be done with them. And what we're looking to do is to see sort of how to redevelop these sites in a way that meets the needs of the community. So, as David mentioned previously, when this project kicked off, we began by meeting up with community members in the area to talk a bit more about what their preferences were, to talk about how they felt about the different sites and how they felt about the neighborhood in general. And what we did was something called the neighborhood knowledge exercise. And what that means is that we provide a large map, and we ask the community to pinpoint areas that they like, spaces that they dislike, and spaces that they feel could be improved. And the idea is just to get general feedback over what is possible to do in this area. And what we found is that the church courtyard and the church grounds in general were very popular, are a very popular place with people in the area. Whereas the main road that cuts through the area, called the highway, is very unpopular. There's a lot of through traffic. It's very loud, very noisy, quite high levels of pollution. And this is something that people felt was quite a negative point in the area. And for the current site, which is not being used at all right now, Site C, people felt that this site had quite a lot of potential and quite a lot could be done with it. And so that's kind of an overview of that first session, and kind of starting to get to understand the area through the eyes of the local community. From there, we conducted site visits, both around the area as well as in other parts of London, to see similar housing projects that are located near historic or areas of historic importance. And the tour was focused on the neighborhood itself, so St. George, Cannon Street Road, and the highway, as well as a visit to Bethnal Green. And the key outcomes was to solve the traffic, air quality, and noise pollution issues. And that goes back to this issue of the main roads and how much they impact the overall quality of the space. There was a preference for traditional facades, for keeping in line with the heritage of the area and the heritage that's reflected by the church. There was also a desire for a community cafe, essentially a space where people could come together, could talk, and that kind of facility currently does not exist in the area. And people also expressed an interest in providing temporary shelter for the homeless in the area. The third session was a co-design workshop. And what co-design essentially means is that architects and urban designers come together and they design with the community. The traditional process of design often means that an architect is operating alone, or the urban designer is operating alone. And this form of design breaks that traditional model where we try and work with the people. And the point of that is to allow design to be a tool that can be used by everyone and not just for those who graduated from architecture school. And the benefit of the co-design process is essentially to see what can work on the site for the community, while also using design techniques brought in by the architects and urban designers. And so a co-design workshop was done with the community members of St. George in the East. And you can see here that this is the initial plan that came out from that workshop. There were different ideas that were given for different parts of the site. And so, for example, you can see here that ideas for Cannon Street Road included making it a one-way street to reduce the impact of traffic, to enhance views of the site, to improve the lighting, and to preserve the existing fence that's there. Ideas for Site A, which extends all across this area, includes, again, preserving the views of the church, providing affordable housing, creating a community cafe, improving the open space and adding things like a fountain and other amenities. The key ideas for the highway included turning it into a 20-mile-per-hour road, adding street furniture, adding a bike lane to provide alternative forms of transport, as well as improving the ability of crossing the street. So adding crosswalks, and one of the connecting points was between the church and Site C. And then the key ideas for the master plan in general were to improve the open space by planting more trees, by providing a play space for children, by improving the leisure center, and just generally making it a space with more activities for all demographics in the community. And Angus and Miriam, please do step in if there's anything that I've forgotten in this overview. And so from this sort of three-phase process, we came up with site briefs for each of for two of the sites, as well as potential solutions that we can apply to the highway in Cannon Street. And so for Site A, the sort of aspirations are to set up a community land trust, which can create housing and provide housing on that site, to create a community cafe, to provide a fountain in front of the church, and to preserve the historic elements, because there's quite a number of key elements around the site and around the church. For sites B and C, again, there is a desire for mixed-use housing, for temporary shelter, as well as to improve views of the church. And for the highway and Cannon Street, again, it's these sort of small solutions to try and reduce the impact of the noise, impact of the traffic in general. And so that includes improving the pedestrian crossing, increasing tree coverage, improving the bicycle lanes, and improving lighting as well, so that it can feel safer at night. And I'm going to let Miriam step in and talk about kind of the follow-up outreach work that they've done since these kind of three phases.
Sure, thank you so much, Nada. So yeah, just building on, I guess, the initial workshops that just happened at the church in the summer of 2019, we kind of recognised the need for deeper community engagement, kind of across other institutions and other kind of demographics in the area. So in January and February and the very beginning of March this year, we kind of set out on a process of community listening. So we held, I think, 6 workshops in total, which were in schools, places of worship, community groups, and I think engaged around just under 100 people, with hopes to engage many more. I think we had a target of like 500 conversations by June or something, but because of COVID, that didn't happen. But the focus of that listening initially was to offer local people the opportunity to have their say on the space around them and the initial designs, which you've just seen, and the ideas kind of sketched out by members of St George's congregation and parish last year. And we kind of wanted to build, some genuine kind of community relationships so that we would have more relational power to then make some of this happen, but also to feel that everyone has been taken on board with this, or as many people as possible. So just to highlight a couple of interesting things that came out of that listening that are worth flagging, and I might kind of contribute some more ideas as we go into the session, because some interesting things came up. But some themes were, real support overall just for affordable housing, and a real sense of anxiety around the City of London creeping in. So that map exercise that Nada mentioned, we repeated that with lots of other groups, and there was that kind of real sense that of fear and anxiety by a lot of parents in particular about a bit like what Phil was touching on, the future of their children not being able to stay in the local area and being forced to move away from family networks. There was a preference for really preserving green space where possible and looking at options like rooftop gardens, things like a green wall along the highway to kind of counterbalance traffic and noise pollution. And there was a lot of support for temporary accommodation in recognition of the the number of people who are homeless locally. And also I think that one of the biggest themes that came up was how much people didn't like the way Cannon Street Road is currently. I wanted to make it much more pretty and pleasant and easier to just walk down or get buggies down. So yeah, unfortunately, obviously the pandemic happened, so it was right to pause that work, but that gave us a block of early engagement and some really interesting ideas to then revisit now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So I guess what we wanted to do is kind of launch into the design process. And what we wanted to just provide was an overview of Site A for everyone who might not be familiar with it. So Site A is located south of the church. While we initially were looking at kind of the entire strip of land to develop, we quickly realized that there are some mature trees on site that the western side of the site would not be suitable for development for a number of reasons. And so the side that we will be focusing on primarily will be that the eastern side of the site, right next to the leisure center. This site is located on the highway, so it's directly in front of kind of this very busy road. However, it's also located right next to the church gardens. It has beautiful views of the church itself. So it's a site with a lot of really pros and cons. And what we're hoping to do with this design exercise is not just to design the house itself, but also to see how it will work with this context. What can we do to minimize the impact of kind of those cars while also maximizing its location next to these very beautiful gardens, next to this very beautiful church. And that's the activity that we want to, or the exercise that we'd love to begin now. Here are the key questions that we kind of will be going through as we begin designing the site. And some of the things that we want to start looking at is how we feel about the height, how high would we like to see the buildings go, what kind of materials you'd like to see on the buildings. And here we can begin to start reflecting what the local character and the local heritage is onto the new development. Starting to think about how and where we should access the homes from the streets, and how we should design the building in relation to the highway. Do we want front access directly from the main road? Would we like side access? If there's any concerns also that the community members have around the site and the surroundings itself, the heritage of the site and of the area, and how it should impact on the buildings, as well as things like gardens, green open space, communal space. How would you change things on the highway? How would you get around if you lived here? It's essentially just kind of a really great opportunity to design the kind of housing that you would like to live in within this context. And that's kind of just to kind of jog the discussion along. So
thank you so much, Ned. I think how about we dive in on Google Earth quickly, just to have a look at the site. We're going to, since we're online, let's use the tools available to us. So I think, Robert, do you have it open on Google Earth? If you can sort of dive into the site, and then very quickly, we're just going to show you a Miro board. So what that essentially is a virtual whiteboard where, as the community members are speaking, as everyone's kind of making the highly relevant, helpful points, we'll be keeping track on this board, so all your work is not in vain. And also we're going to sort of screenshot the different designs and throw them on this board, which we can share with everyone at the end of the day as well. So Robert, do you want to just sort of take us through, hopefully, and I'm probably speaking to the panel here, hopefully we can all see that and it's not too small, just to give us a bit of a context to the site, and we'll do a little fly through and a little walk around.
Yeah, so this is the church as seen from the highway, and also you can see the highway. It is always a really busy road, 4 lanes, a lot of air pollution. It's one of the most polluted roads in London. And so essentially this is the eastern portion of Site A. If we go down a bit here, this is the leisure center, which potentially is a site down the road, but we won't be looking at it today. Right now on the east side of Site A, we have this pedestrian lane which goes back towards the churchyard. When perhaps it's something we'll want to keep, I would imagine so. We've got a number of mature trees, again, on the very eastern edge of Site A, so that could potentially be a limitation. And there might be some tree protection orders on those as well. And then between, on the west side of Site A, can't quite see it here on Street View, it's a bit annoying, but you've got this kind of island with stairs either side of it, and there's a bit of a level change from the pavement, from the highway up towards the church. And so then on the other side of the street, we have Site C, which we'll be looking at a little bit later. And then if I just leave Street View for a second, we can see here what Site A looks like from the top. And so some of the historical context, here is St. George in the East, of course, Grade 1 listed church, but also this wall that runs on the south edge of St. George's Gardens, the original churchyard, is also Grade 1 listed. So that is a potential concern that we have to keep in mind when designing, how close do you have new buildings to a Grade 1 listed wall, for example. And so then during this whole workshop process, we'll be keeping notes of everything that people say on this Miro board, divided into 3 quadrants. So here are kind of general comments that people will be making throughout the afternoon, and then the separate sites, Site A, again divided into various sections, comments on height, how you might deal with the highway, gardens and green space, heritage issues, street access, mobility, and of course we can add other categories if people make comments. And then we'll be doing the same with Site C later in the afternoon, which we'll do a separate intro on later. And so me, David, and Netta will all be filling in this board throughout the afternoon. And occasionally we'll be coming back to it to see if we've captured everybody's comments, and depending on who's sketching, who's designing, somebody will be taking notes down. So your comments will be captured. I think that's about it in terms of intro right now. Did we want to jump right into co-design?
Yeah, I think unless anyone's got any sort of burning things they want to say, there's so much work that's kind of going on behind the scenes and other exciting things happening. But I think the time is now to get into Site A. What we really want to do today is we've got and Robert's showed you some of the 2D plans, and on the back recap that Netta did, we saw some of the 2D plans which we worked up last year with John Thompson and Partners, an urban design firm who are actually just to the south of the site as well. We've got these plans, so what we want to do today is make these 3D. So we want to kind of give this some height, give this some volume, and start thinking about what this can actually look like. So why don't we kick off, Netta? I think if we go into, so this is a design package called SketchUp, and you'll see we've tried to sort of recreate the buildings to a certain extent, not entirely. You'll see there's quite a few blocks in there to represent some of them. But what we want to do is to start, going through these questions, and I'm going to be asking people to grab the mic as well, community members to grab the mic soon to start answering the questions such as what kind of material do we think about, what kind of height do we want to have for the building itself? How do we relate this to the highway? What do we think about private gardens? Do we want communal gardens? All these kind of questions. So I'm going to sort of hand over to Netta, and then when she's designing, we'll throw in some different comments. But really now, I think the strength of co-design is actually listening to everyone else's opinion. So everyone on the panel, all the permanent speakers, please feel free to sort of unmute yourselves and start entering the discussion about the design. And likewise, to all the community members who I know and hope are in the audience, I've been chatting to a couple of them, either leave comments and we'll read them out as time goes on, and we'll update the Miro board as Robert showed you, or request the mic and come on, you will appear, and we are recording the session just as a sort of quick heads up, and have your say, and then we'll hopefully rotate through that. But it should be a sort of quite an informal session now until 6 p.m. Over to you, Netta.
Thanks, David. I guess just one quick word before we dive into the designs is, the term co-design can often seem very technical. The idea is everyone can design, everyone can create great space. It's not something that only architects can do. So one thing that I do want to stress to everyone is that there is no right or wrong answer in this process. What we're trying to do is design a place that you would want to live in, and we want to design a place that reflects your values, that reflects your needs. And so please do not think that, because you don't know anything about buildings or about architecture, then you cannot give your feedback. We want to hear from everyone, and design is for everyone, and that's really the point of this process. So yeah, if we could kick it off. We have this site right here, the one that we talked about, which is Site A. It's next to the leisure center. I guess maybe a quick word about just these white blocks everywhere. These are existing buildings in the area. The lines represent the height of each block. So for example, over here, you would find a block with 3 floors. Here, the leisure center, you can see, is 4 floors. And that's just to give you an idea of how high the surrounding buildings are, so that when we start designing our own buildings, you'll get a sense of the scale and the size. And so this is the site that we're discussing. This is it's outlined in red, and what we want to do is kind of start designing within this box. Again, this is the highway in front of the site. It's located right south of the church grounds and the church itself. And I guess sort of what kind of buildings do we want to see here? And I guess I'm going to give the floor over to our community members to kind of talk to us about what kind of housing they'd like to see here. Sarah, Emily, or...
Yeah. Well, I just say that we've had some comments in as well. For people are saying that it's important that it's the same kind of colour as the church, and also and on height, perhaps looking at the same height as the leisure centre, which is about 4 stories?
Yes.
Yeah, 4 or 5 stories. So that's quite a lot of building. I don't know what people think for out to floors. Do we want to say that we want to have gardens facing the highway and then the access being beside the church, or do people think it's better to have the access from the highway and the gardens towards the church, or both?
What would you think, Sarah?
I would personally think that having the access being through the sideway, as long as you could make it maybe put ramps in, so it's not just stairs, the access being through that courtyard beside the church and having that as a road that's sort of a public road access that they can kind of go round there would be better because it would be safer for children.
So you're saying around here would be the access?
Yeah, sort of like the access comes here as long as you can as long as it's not only through stairs, I think. Okay. You can still come up for the highway, but have the gardens back onto the highway, perhaps.
I can see Robert, as you're speaking, typing your notes in as well, so I don't need to worry about that. So I think, it looks like, and having sort of, for those of us lucky enough to sort of walk around the site, that does seem to be a really sensible place, I think, to potentially have access. You can maybe have it on the other side as well. There's no reason why you'd want to limit that necessarily, because you do have that sort of quite high hedgerow, which is by the highway itself, which is obviously a busy road as well at the moment.
We have some interesting comments from community members saying develop an integrated space around the church, having a nice garden, using traditional materials, make a piazza around the church and access from the piazza.
Oh, right, yeah, good.
Yeah. So I guess also Gren has mentioned the buildings to the west of Cannon Street as a great example of what not to do. So I guess what we want to avoid is kind of a large block of a building, and instead what we're looking for is more human scale housing. And I guess maybe what we can start to look at is to see the possibility of creating a terrace on the site and seeing
Which is what you said, just under 70 years ago, I think it was. There was a Georgian row of terraces along right on this site.
So
Trish, who's coming from the comments a little bit, grew up on the site of the church and remembers those buildings. So it might be good for Trish to get the mic at some point and talk a little bit about
Trish,
that.
please feel free to request the mic, and I will absolutely bring you in. There we go.
She's gonna come in.
So here we have a block that's 4 stories, maybe pushed back from the highway a bit.
And I think it's probably worth sort of, Neda, sort of zooming out and talking about what we think pros and, looking at, because this is, it's quite a big thing talking about how high you build the building. And we've had some comments already about, we've got, it's a grade 1 listed church. We can't sort of get around that. So we've got to, I guess some of the factors to think about are light, shading, relation to listed walls. So these are all going to be a bit of a challenge.
And those mature trees on the east of the site as well.
Yes.
That'll be a consideration.
So we would have to.
Can we bring in design from the church then of the Hawksmoor? Could it have, maybe not in this, but as a note, could we have designed that curved design that sort of travels through St George's, which is particularly beautiful, sort of like adding in some sort of, maybe not on this, but some sort of curve, like the front of St George's there.
We could, yeah. So a curve, would you say on this side of the block? Or, okay.
Yeah, if anyone else agrees, of course.
I think it sounds like a lovely idea. We're also having requests to decorate the building as well, which I think everyone would agree with. That actually was. I'm going to give Neda some time to design, because I know this is a particularly tricky skill. But I've got some of the reports and some of the comments which we heard from the walking tours, and we went to another grade 1 listed church, which was near the Bethnal Green Mission Church. And some of the key comments there were about some of the housing was just quite boring, basically, is what people felt, that didn't have the same kind of care and love and detail that had been sort of attributed to it. I
think Gren's made quite a good comment about not creating any more grey space, because there's a real problem in this whole park gardens area with antisocial behaviour, which has probably got worse actually during lockdown, the pandemic. So I think that's important. I don't know if everyone wants to say any more about that, but that theme of things being like looking attractive, buildings looking attractive as well, is really key. But for that, and thinking about how the space around it can be used by those that are not necessarily living there, but can maintain safety as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's. A number of people here have experience of living around the church. I don't, although obviously I have experience of being there as a priest. But I do think thinking about how this development will actually help the rest of the green space to work, depending on how we develop it, is really important. Because as I think Neda said, the feedback has been that the St George's Gardens, the space to the east of the church, is a space the community really values. But precisely because there's that main garden that people value and in fact have successfully organised for more lighting of, there are these other spaces that don't really work at the moment. So I think depending on how this is laid out, this can actually help the rest of the space to be much more owned and used by the community.
Yeah, definitely. I think.
And Grant's also pointed out.
Yeah, I said as someone that's lived at the church previously, security would be very important, particularly for the antisocial behaviour in the park. So I wonder, just practical things, if there's any space for gating. And I'm also wondering about parking, if people have cars where they park, because on the highway there's no space for that. So whether there could be space for that as well.
And to add to that, it could bring in an electric charging element, so it doesn't just have to be petrol car parking.
So Trisha, I'm trying to bring you in at the moment. It's just not letting me let you in at the moment. Yeah, Miriam, I'm having the same issue. I'll just keep trying to bring you in. If anyone else did want to request the mic as well, please do try. And I think, one of the key challenges we're going to have with this as well is the relation to the church itself and the listed building. I think protecting views, especially from the road, and actually we should be aspiring to enhance the views, I think, and inspiring to quite a few of the comments we had from the second session, maybe in the third session, were people, not kind of realizing this incredible Hawksmoor listed building was right there on their commute or on their walk around, and how can we sort of, bring this out to the street as well as much as possible. So I think that's one thing we might have to sort of focus on, and at points we can maybe drop down into street view, into the sort of adults view, as it were, and look at the church and think about, okay, does the height work here? Does the mass of the building work here? Is it too big? Is it too small? Gren doesn't want the fence. Gren, do you? Sorry, Trisha. I will try and keep bringing you in, but it's saying too many people are grabbing the mic, which I'm not quite sure how, because we don't have anyone grabbing the mic at the moment.
It's not that there are too many of us here.
Yeah, I don't know, because I'll let people into the secret. We did practice this first, and yeah, we had people grabbing it and working fine. So, Gren, do you want to try grabbing them? Because obviously you're giving us lots of valuable information at the moment, just to see if it works for you. Okay, let's try this. No, it's also saying too many people.
I'll try and leave and see what happens.
Thank you, Phil.
Harry can text me, see if it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Just a heads up to let me know if anything I'm doing is not popular.
Why don't we sort of take a pause, have a look at it, sort of bring Sarah, Emily, and Shamara in, and then have a look at some of the comments to see what people think of it so far.
Is there any possibility that it won't be? I think there was expressed for a little bit less sort of uniform looking to the front. Is there any way that it sort of can bring in? I mean, obviously you want to maintain the ability to provide more people homes, but to sort of bring in those Victorian or Georgian styling that makes it look a little bit less like it's one new modern block.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, with some of the comments that we've had in previous sessions, people did like Georgian facades, traditional facades generally.
I think as we sort of work through, it always looks very blocky, the first kind of stage in the design process. And if we start kind of with yourselves with the volume, and we'll kind of get that volume, because it might be we want to shrink this a bit, we might want to change it, and then we start sort of adding layers. So we'll add the materials and think about, we might get to adding windows, and actually that's where you start to get this detail, is almost right near the end. And unfortunately, a lot of buildings, it seems like you never get to that interesting detail.
Trisha may know this from sort of remembering playing in the ruins of it. But I'm just thinking, I wonder what the fabric of the pre-Blitz housing was, because a lot of I've seen a couple of people talking, Gren and I think a couple of others, about Discovery Walk, which is, I think, brick. And actually a lot of the housing, the older housing around St George's on the other side is brick. As indeed the walls, the Grade 1, some of the Grade 1 walls, I think.
Yeah.
Some of so I'm wondering it'd be interesting to see what different kinds of texture would offset the building best.
Someone made an interesting comment about a balcony as well.
Yeah.
Having balconies incorporated.
Mm.
I guess the question is, what kind of balconies? Sorry, Angus, go ahead.
Because I was just reading out Trisha's comment that most of the housing that was there when Hawks, before the Blitz, were brick with shop fronts downstairs and living accommodation above.
So very similar, I imagine, to quite a few on Cannon Street Road as well, which sort of goes down the side, and that used to almost wrap around that whole block, as it were.
Because I think there's something here about what the communities, what this whole process is doing, which is about thinking of heritage in terms of not trapping the site in a point that it had got to that was never Hawksmoor's intention.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually work, but how something develops that honours the architecture and the original configuration a bit more.
Yeah. So Neda,
Yes.
Why don't we? I feel like we should just take a pause on the design. Maybe drop ourselves down onto, imagine we're walking past on the highway, and just sort of ask ourselves a question: what do we think about the mass of the building before we sort of get too into the detail of it?
Okay.
Do you want to try that?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, it's just gone.
Oh, you meant dropping it into the
sketch model.
Okay.
We can see what the mass is. Yeah.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Gren is still not letting me bring you in. I will keep trying. So one thing we always find is a lot of architects show the bird's eye view, and you always see these amazing structures, from 200 to 300 feet. And unfortunately, most people aren't kind of operating at that level. Most of us are walking around at a bit, between five to six. So what we like to do is really kind of when we're doing the model and doing the drawings, put ourselves in the perspective of the child, of the adult, and see what they see. So I think if we sort of drag ourselves along and imagine, yes, we don't have the detail, and we'll definitely get onto the bricks or stone or whatever material people want to talk about. But what do we think about the height? What if you just sort of go back a little bit, and maybe if you just go down the street a bit, Neda, to near the leisure centre, and then sort of look at the height here.
From here,
I think the height's okay if the roofs were individual pointy roofs. So therefore, when you're looking down from the highway, you got a more of a broken view. I think at the moment, it's the unbroken view is the same height as the church, and I think that possibly is too high. But if you had individual pointed roofs like a terrace or something fancy and modern, sloping or something, I think maybe that would help. So
you mean playing with the heights of?
Well, sort of bringing it, sort of like almost. I know it would make the top ones a slopey rim, but you can live in a slopey rim. So you'd have the sort of pointy roofs. Like it is on Discovery Walk, like Grand keeps saying. On Discovery Walk, the top floor they have these sort of pointy Victorian style roofs, even so they were built in the 80s, I believe. And people live in them. They have windows, and they're not attics. Or something like that. But individual pointy roofs is sort of what I was thinking.
No, I don't think it's quite the sort of step up. It's more roof pitch. Now, did you want to just stop sharing a sec? I want to share a photo which is quite interesting. I'll just let me bring up. So hopefully people can see my screen. I'm going to zoom in, so I know it's a lot smaller. So here we can see, so I think this was just after the war, so you can see a little bit of bomb damage, and then these weren't all bombed out, they were cleared after the war as well. And I guess we can see, what have we got here? So here, these are all the shops which are at the base. We've got 2, 3, 4 stories, some pitched roofs, which Sarah, I know you're talking about here.
It's quite striking the way that echoes. I mean, the Discovery Walk in its variety.
Yeah. I'll just stop So it kind of, hopefully I've stopped sharing that now, and Ned, you can bring up the model again. So that is that kind of what you're getting at, Sarah, Emily, those kind of.
I think so. So more, so there, yeah, the more in the variation in the individual buildings, I think adds some character to the design, I think.
And I really like that comment from Jim.
I think Gren really wants us to have a look at Discovery Walk if we can, which is quite easy to on Google Maps, perhaps.
Robert, talking of Discovery Walk, could you have a look, just whilst we're sort of going on with some design, have a look at getting that up on Google Maps? And I think if we maybe have a little sort of tour from you guys to help us really with that. Are you able to bring that up, Robert? Or have a look at it?
Yeah, I'm bringing up some images now.
That's great, thank you.
So is this the kind of roof pitch that you guys were talking about, to have a little bit of variety?
That is what I was meaning. Yes, I probably should defer to some other people, but that is what I was meaning. Gren is not giving you such a high review.
Just to answer the question about how many houses, I think at this stage what we're just talking about is the form and massing of the house. Once we kind of decide on how big the block will be, what are the different features, and then we can start to look into designing sort of the inside of the house. So basically doing the floor plans, and from there we can see how many homes we can fit into this block. Because we feel like it's slightly, it'll be slightly faster than trying to design each house individually, if that makes sense.
I've got Discovery Walk up. Maybe if we quickly do a share screen switch.
Yes.
And I'll give it back to you, Ned, in a minute.
Go ahead.
So this is Discovery Walk, which a number of people have mentioned in the comments section. It's a newish development, not too far away from the site. And you can see here the individual pitched roofs, which help break up the mass of the buildings and the roof. Unfortunately, there's no street view actually in here, so we can't go down to street level. But there are also some photos here, which show how the various architectural elements break up the large mass of some of the buildings. I mean, is this generally reflect what you'd like to see with the architecture?
Yeah, I think you can see there the sort of the difference in the sort of pitched roofs bring into the sort of very sympathetic design, despite the fact that I think it's all over what was originally water for the last 200 years, so it's not actually copying anything.
Yeah, I mean, it originally would have been quite an industrial area, and it is part of a quite large development. But yeah, that's Discovery Walk. Back to you, Ned.
In terms of the actual architecture, I wonder how many bedrooms each of those kind of units would have. There's something that's been like a theme definitely in community listening for both the CLT on Cable Street and but future developments is larger housing for larger families. So kind of if there's possibility for 4 and even 5 bedrooms.
You do get 4 bedrooms in those houses. I do know that. Not all of them are, obviously. Some of them are flats, which are more 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms.
I think that roof design is quite aesthetically pleasing and goes well with the church. I just wonder, do you lose much space? Because I'm wondering the demography of the people that might live in there have quite large families.
Mm-hmm.
So do we lose a lot of space by having that type of roof? I don't know the answer to that question.
So you can still include rooms kind of on that top level. It wouldn't be as big, I guess, as the floors beneath it. But something I guess we can start to talk about is, are we envisioning maisonette style housing where you have houses stacked on top of one another, so almost as flats? Each building would be a series of flats, Or would you guys prefer to have much larger housing for families, in which case one sort of unit would be an entire house? And I guess this would be an interesting conversation to have, in which I can't necessarily reflect it in the design here, but it would be good to hear your feedback of what size of housing are you guys looking for? What are the size of the families? And then also, what is the style of housing that you prefer in terms of apartment buildings or terraces? So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Well, and one of the benefits of a pitched roof is that it does make the mass of the building seem smaller. So you can have a slightly taller building, but it doesn't look as large because the mass of the top is smaller.
We know there's a lack of large family housing in the area in general. So that's always a need. But then there's housing need for everyone in the area, but there's definitely always been a lack of larger family housing. But that does have to be balanced with making it affordable to the people who can live there. Yeah, so exactly, as Ben says, there's a lack of everyone. There's not enough housing.
I wonder if there could be a mixed approach and some maisonette that are flats for couples or smaller size families, and then one or two or a smaller number of larger ones potentially.
I think that's a really good idea. We, looking at maintaining the sort of form as you see of the building here, but actually one of these could be, a single family home, but one could be, like you said, a split level maisonette, maybe the, first and second floor for one family, third and fourth floor for another family. But and actually you find these kind of buildings, terrace buildings, can be incredibly flexible and can adapt through time, even from, shop fronts on the ground floor when that isn't, when that isn't the case, that can be converted to residential, maybe back to shop front in 50 years time. We really want to be designing this for, the next 150, 200 years. We need to get past the sort of disposable, build something cheaply and quickly and then change it once, trends change as well. So I think that's definitely something worth sort of commenting down in the notes, Robert, can we have some split level maisonette? There's obviously factors we come up with that are, needing to introduce lifts for the third and fourth floors and for the top floor residential if you do split it, which can be done potentially by having, a central one lift which sort of you share throughout the top floors of the rest of the building. You can do things like that.
Are we having any more private garden space, or are we thinking that we want it all to be sort of communal to other houses, or is it going to be the case where perhaps there's communal gardens plus small individual gardens that people are responsible for themselves?
That depends on you guys.
What do you think about that? As long as you don't lose it just because you're an upstairs flat, is the feedback we've had before from that.
Sorry, could you just say that again?
Some of the feedback we've had on gardens, communal versus private gardens before, if people prefer private gardens, but as long as they're not only for the people who just live on the ground floor. So as long as there's some sort of, there's also gardens for people who live above, or there's some other way of doing it, then that's some of the feedback we've had.
I suppose we've also just got to remember that this is on existing green space, so there's going to be a concern about making sure we're not losing green space and how we can bear that in mind.
Yeah, a couple of comments on that actually. I was intrigued. I think Charles O'Brien's comments in the comments on this about the view from the front from Cannon Street Road being the most significant architecturally originally, the one
again to bring up
that is an area where the land currently doesn't really work, and where there might be a capacity, and this is something we've discussed in the workshops, not today, but for more green space of a kind that actually will enable. One of the interesting things now is that where you've got the biggest view, nobody really sees it because the highway is this horrible fast road. Nobody walks on those pavements. And then you've got Site C that nobody's on, and then you've got the back of Tobacco Dock. So there's something about this, thinking about what we do as a whole, which enables more of the architecture to be valued by more people, perhaps again in a way it might have been originally intended. The other thought, just to bowl in, is I wonder, because some people really love tending green space in Tower Hamlets, and some people are relieved not to have to. I wonder what capacity there might be in other bits of the site for turning some of the green space that we're not developing into allotments or something, whether there are ways of having space that those who really want to, because there's a great, there's some people really love the allotments, and I know some children and families for whom that's a real delight in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah, I think I was just making a note of that, Angus. Yeah, looking just very simply at percentage of open space versus percentage of sort of built space, I think is a really poor metric, because you just ignore the quality of green space versus against the quantity of green space. People have already mentioned the housing to the west of Cannon Street Road. That's on our site walk around. We heard that was a good example of poor green space. It wasn't owned. It wasn't private nor public, really. It was just space which was there and not being used. Miriam, I'm getting a bit of feedback from your...
Sorry. I've tried to say something before, but then I think I muted myself. Oh, right. No, I was just going to say on Angus's point that that we've got quite a good relationship with the church and wider community, with the council's parks team, and they are really keen and actually have budget to potentially do something around community allotments, and that's something that quite a few members of our group are quite interested in. So I think that's just got to be crucial, and that'd be crucial to offsetting, I think, any criticism about losing green space.
And actually really enhancing the green space on other parts around the church, and that area Angus mentions, the most powerful view onto the west is probably the best one to look at. So I'm just going to go through, Neda. I don't know if you're able to sort of look at some of the comments and just sort of pause for a second, because Gren has been making quite a few points about fencing off.
Okay.
I don't think that's going down very well, which is good. This is what we want. We want the kind of the challenge.
Yes.
Miriam, I'm still getting a little bit of feedback. It's saying it's coming through yours. I don't know why. Okay, I think that's better. So I'm just going to go back through the comments, because I really don't want to lose some of the great ideas. So Richard, who's in the audience, is talking about obviously the balconies. I think that's something we'll probably look at, and look at where would you want to have those balconies, where would they be? Obviously, if you've got the private gardens, then you're giving properties access to that private space. If we have communal gardens, then that's potentially a good solution for people if they are in the split level maisonettes. I've seen Valerie Steinberg's spoken about if some properties are broken down into smaller properties, so you can have smaller houses, smaller flats which become more affordable. Is there a way to guarantee green space for those smaller properties? I think that's definitely very worth looking at. Gren mentioning about the fence, and why do we actually need to have a fence around it, which is valid. At the moment, the whole of that section is fenced off, but I think potentially opening up parts of this green space is albeit you'll have some of the accommodations, some of the houses, but opening up to everyone else is a real positive you can have from this project. And Gren was talking about having communal garden for the houses and the gardens, I believe. Get rid of the concrete. I don't believe you were putting concrete down. I think that was just some SketchUp.
That was just some paving blocks. I can change them to something with some color, I guess.
And I don't believe it was a parking area. I hope, Neda, it was just putting in some of the different, objects when you do it on SketchUp.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to talk a bit about the balconies, and it would be good to get people's sense of what the balconies can look like. So what I'll do here is just sort of assume that we'll have balconies on the first floor here that could overlook this green space, whether we decide for it to be private gardens or one communal garden. And again, just to clarify, nothing that I am doing is set in stone. I'm just kind of playing around in order to get people to give us feedback as to what I'm doing, so we know which direction we're going in. Nothing that I'm doing is permanent at all, and that's the fun thing about SketchUp. So if we assume, for example, if we have here on this first floor, let's say maybe 2.5 meters of dock.
And Gren's clear preferences for communal gardens. Shamara, I don't know, what do you feel about the sort of private versus communal gardens? Is it something you prefer to have a private garden or a communal garden, or perhaps both? Maybe we can have slightly smaller private gardens with a larger communal one.
Yeah, I think there could be a mixture of both, because the reality is there is a park right outside, so there is space for people to be communal. So yeah, I think a mixture of both, and also I'm mindful that there is actually that listed wall that you spoke about at the very beginning, that will put a divide between the public and those living there. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, so Neda, I think that's probably worth looking at in the design is, can we have some of the private gardens for either ground floor apartments or the single family terraced homes, and then having a communal one, around this as well.
Absolutely.
Having small.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, although it's not a continuation at the moment, having access to a small piece of space that isn't shared between the entire block does mean that you can have, little parties and things, and you can let your children out without worrying that they're going to be able to make their way to the road, etc. So I think it will be popular to have very small outside spaces as well as communal outside spaces.
Thank you. And there's comments on, thinking about, can we use some of the methods coming out from Denmark, where you have communal gardens which are accessible by the public but only at certain hours of the day, so that you can then have gardens which are private for residents at some times and then public at other times, which I think is quite a nice suggestion, quite a nice idea.
So I guess with the question of communal gardens, would we be able to use some of this site here where the trees currently exist? And really, how close can we get to the church with the boundary that we have for the housing project as well?
Someone's also saying that if the rear is going to be in shade, then there is the option, and it would perhaps make it less, you could have the gardens if you wanted to facing the highway, and then you could use greenery on the wall there to create a green wall at the end, and then you would have kind of this sort of like front space. I think Discovery Walk does have to use that a lot. It's very nice. Does have little courtyards out the back that kind of face the public walkway, and then the walls are completely covered in ivy now. And that sort of brings in this sort of green, makes it look very green to the front, but also, you can have parties and wave at people's children.
Just looking for vines. So I guess also just while I'm doing this program, it's called SketchUp. It is freely available online. It's very easy to use, and as you can see here, I'm using the option to look for components, which essentially are blocks that you can download and put into your model without having to spend time modeling something yourself. And it's a great way to kind of do these kind of activities. So working up a quick idea or a quick sketch of what you want to see. Here we have different types of vines.
Oh, yeah. Someone, Jim has come and said that he wants one of the he wants kind of take away one of the center blocks and extend it towards the church.
take away the center block
I don't
instead
quite
of
understand what that.
Yeah. Maybe if Jim to request a mic, or if that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's not. Gren, if you, because I know you're requesting the mic, if you sort of unrequest the mic, and then we'll see if we can reset it that way as well.
We have to keep in mind as well that if you extend the buildings closer towards the church, then you start running into issues with that grade 1 listed wall. And generally, probably Historic England would have some issues with building too close to a grade 1 listed church.
Robert, why don't we, thank you. Thank you. Robert, why don't you, because I know you've got your digital sketching pad, just sort of start thinking maybe about, because we've seen this a lot at the moment on what we call the elevation view, thinking about what kind of plan layout might we want, and thinking about the orientation of the gardens, communal gardens, etc. And maybe do a little bit of sketching in response to people's comments.
Sure. So I'll just quickly pull up the plan that I have.
And I think we need Neda to stop sharing. You can sort of
yes.
carry on beavering away in the background a bit.
And I mean, I guess Neda's running into the same issue. While sketching, I can't really read the comments or anything. So please.
We'll keep reading them.
Yeah, very, very audible with your comments.
And I think one of the key parts we might want to tackle that Gren's raised here is about being careful about not creating a desert between the church and the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it's these kind of like nooks and crannies that a lot of designs you see around nowadays do create, and they can lead to potential antisocial behaviour. And what we want to create is, really active frontages and really active buildings, whereby, you have people who are sort of looking out onto the street, participating in the community, really being sort of, the eyes of the community, keeping everyone safe. So do you want to, if you zoom in a bit more, just because it minimises on our screen, and then, just sort of talk us through, what kind of questions would you like us to sort of, like everyone to answer to help the design here?
I mean, so basically I'm following on from Neda's lead. I've divided into 4 potential building blocks, so to speak. And earlier I heard the suggestion to have the access from the courtyard.
Yeah.
So are we thinking that it should be sort of right next to the listed wall or closer to the buildings? And then if you deal with that, do you want the entrances into the individual buildings from the highway side or from the back side? Perhaps if we have the communal gardens facing the highway, which is the south-facing part, which perhaps people would spend more time, right? If it's a sunny south-facing garden, perhaps you do want the entrances to the north of the building. So, anybody else?
So on the comments, we've had a few things. So we've had Jim was saying that he would like a courtyard, like in design, he does agree with, and a piazza around the church with the buildings facing into it. And Gren has also come back and agreed with that. So Gren was a piazza, and Jim was the courtyard. So and they do think having more of the access from the courtyard. I will to add to that, I do agree. You were talking about not having access to the road, but I will say the road as a foot traffic is not particularly high. So there's not much foot traffic past the church, I would say. I think on that side of the highway. If it was clear that the access to the church was public from Cannon Street Road, you could use that to create an access, perhaps? Is that what people think?
So perhaps having access somewhere here from the highway.
Yeah.
And going up into the buildings, and then perhaps individual entrances into some of the buildings.
That isn't what people are saying. I will just throw that in there. That is the opposite of what people are saying. I think what people are suggesting, and I think maybe should let some other people come in on this, but they are saying entrances are better to the north, areas to the south acting as a buffer zone with high planting trees around the boundary has been suggested as well. And a suggestion to think like St Paul's Cathedral Park from Gren. and have the access, make the church piazza grey bit there more public than it is at the moment, and you make that public access to there.
You would have, say, the access here from the piazza.
Yeah.
And then go into the individual blocks.
Yeah.
And then possibly this could be the bit that's gated, that's private space in essence, communal gardens where people would have no concern about members of the public getting access. And then what do you do in the back? Would this be just sort of green space, or would it actually be a nice communal garden of sorts?
Well, some people have thrown out there just deserving to bring back to that they don't actually like the four blocks element, and they wanted more space in the middle of the design. But I'm not. So that's been in there, which hasn't been addressed. And therefore maybe we could end up having some more space towards the highway there somehow.
I think on those points, the balance and the sort of trade-offs. Firstly, we did some site tours of some housing nearby, and we went to Bethnal Green. I've just got some of the comments which came out, and people really liked the terraced houses there. It was called Paradise Row. I don't know if Ansel Miriam remembers, and it basically got 5 out of 5 from everyone who went to visit it. Comments like, "They look like homes. This is my favourite spot. People want terraced houses, with gardens."
Yeah.
Yes, if we had a gap in there,
those were quite
there are some benefits.
They had no setback from the street.
Is that you then are you're losing some space then for some of the affordable houses. So it's that balance between how many affordable homes, and this great opportunity we might have versus, detached homes.
I mean, we could always, of course, extend the houses closer to the highway if people are. With like modern triple glazed windows, noise wouldn't necessarily be an issue, and then perhaps you'd be building somewhere that wouldn't really be used by people anyways. If people wouldn't be using garden space facing the highway anyway, then
I'm seeing quite a few nods there.
I think
Hannah's
made an interesting point about gardens in the south, but the noise and traffic. And an idea which came up in a few of the workshops earlier in the year was around, like, could there be I think there's this idea called like a green wall, like, so covered in plants and greenery that could both absorb actual air pollution and noise pollution potentially. I don't know if that's something, or that would be something that, and like the council would have to look into, but is that something that could be considered?
I definitely think it's something we should throw in there. Notes on green walls. We've looked into them before in different projects. They're very expensive. Trees are cheaper. And trees have a lot of associated mental health benefits, and can be, very efficient. So actually there is already that kind of quite well grown up hedgerow. Can we add to that potentially? Maybe we can look at sort of green walls or climbing plants on other walls. I think the real heart of this, and this was a big on our walking tour back in, I think it was probably April last year. Pollution is came up a lot, and I think quite rightly, and that's why we had a whole table at our co-design session last summer when we were all together physically. It was lovely, but we're looking at the highway, so this road that you can just see creeping into the south. And actually, I think as part of this project, we almost need to simultaneously or join to it really think about how do we change this road? How do we rethink the highway? Should we have this big, busy, fast, I think it's 40 miles an hour just outside the congestion zone road in what we hope will be a residential area, and before too long hopefully will be a residential area. So rather than us, I've seen comments about let's move the houses away. You sometimes hear the phrase turn their backs on the roads, which we did start to do as roads became unpleasant. Actually, if you look at a lot of the existing houses, we sort of we front onto the street, as we'd like to say, where the street is pleasant. So can we reframe this road? Can we change this road from a big busy road to a pleasant street? I think that might be that might be a more exciting option for us to look at.
And one of the comments that we had a lot during the July workshop was making a pedestrian crossing right here in front of the church. I think that seemed to be a very popular solution, just to slow cars down and create access between the two sites, Site A and Site C, possibly creating some road narrowing points, making the road a bit uneven so the cars would slow down.
People spoke about bike lanes along. Could you take up some of that road space for a bike lane, encourage more people to get around sustainably? We know lots of people in London just simply can't afford a car and don't have access to a car, but do have access to a second-hand bike or a cheap bike. But it's really it's not a pleasant place to cycle at the moment. So can we change that? And Robert's putting in where we've got the red dashed lines. Some of the comments from previous workshops were about having a raised crossing to extend. And Gren, I know you've been talking about the plaza, and actually having this beautiful plaza just to the south of the church, which extends across the road at a level height, which would then force cars to slow down a bit. It'd be really wary of anyone who's crossing, into Site C, when hopefully Site C becomes, another beautiful place eventually. And yeah, Phil, I agree. It'll be an interesting fight, but I think probably a worthy one.
I mean, did anybody else have any comments about what you might be able to do with the highway to make it a more pleasant place, and perhaps that would also help with making the building closer to the highway, and then it could actually be larger as a result?
I think just two quick thoughts. One is, I think there's this general question that Phil rightly raises as to, is it winnable to actually? It would be quite exciting if it is for the highway to change. The other thing is that because it's been like this for so long, quite a lot of the other stuff around has its back to the highway. So you'd have to think, why would someone even on a slightly slower highway be walking along it? What would they be walking from and to? Because Cable Street, really the Cable Street, which is parallel to the north, is often where people, and you can always see Cannon Street down to St George's, but no further, is where a lot of the walking is. However, there is quite a lot of stuff around there. There's Site C, and there's the land next to Site C, which other people are developing right across to the McDonald's and the petrol station. There is planning applications in. So it could be that there is a critical mass that could build up there for a more humane road-facing development. But I kind of think you'd need to be sure of that before you design something here on the assumption that it would, you'd really have to be sure that you weren't just leaving an island of people facing in the wrong direction in a street that fundamentally is still dominated by the car.
Yeah.
And we do have that, although it is through the church car park, there is alternative access to the site from Cannon Street Road. So there is sort of a way that you can come through, and it's quite wide all the way through there. So if that would be, if you could change the paving, so you had paving that looked like it was a road coming, paving like a pedestrian walkway around it, and then you had benches, etc., in the grey space behind it, etc. You would then make that look like a road. I understand that I'm cutting out the church's car park, so I'm doing that. So do it. Shooting myself in the foot.
But certainly this area, you could imagine it being a bit nicer, right?
Mm.
Perhaps you have cars park along that entrance into the site, which is sort of here, right?
Yeah.
And then people need to feel safe crossing from their communal garden, either if they're going that way and this way as well. Right now, this area is quite narrow, right? You've got these little steps here. Perhaps you'd want to have that be a bit of a nicer public space. And I imagine, is there currently lighting in this piazza place at night?
No.
I think that was one of the things from our workshop. Can we light this? Can we make?
No, there's no light in there.
Okay.
An interesting question. I don't know whether the fact of doing this it would stop it. Is there's been occasional discussions of whether it would be good to have St George's floodlit, because it's a stunning building, but actually, particularly the tower, I don't know whether that could affect the dynamics of what was good and safe.
Well, I think that would certainly add to the the drama of living there as well. And I mean, having the floodlights would provide light elsewhere as well. So I think that would be a lovely idea. Maybe we can look at throwing that on the SketchUp model at some point as well.
There's been an interesting point about disability access as well, and ensuring that we make provision for that.
That's a very good point. If you did have people obviously disabled people would not be able to take these steps now. Possibly you could have, rather than steps on one of the sides, you could have a ramp on one side and steps on the other. Because I don't think you'd want people to come from the Cannon Street Road entrance and kind of have to do this really long alternative route.
A lot of people were approached from the north because the DLR and the overground is to the north.
Yeah.
So right now we have this path, right, that kind of goes from the gardens on the east side of the site. So that would be a popular route for a lot of people to come. So I imagine you'd want to have an entrance from the path as well.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And that's that's going to be a sort of a challenge as well, to make that connecting path along in between the listed wall and the back gardens a safe place, a pleasant place to walk and be.
So this is a quick sketch I was making earlier when people were talking. So perhaps thinking about that listed wall back there. Because it is a listed wall, you wouldn't be able to just extend a very similar wall, but perhaps you could do some sort of railings, and then of course have a gate somewhere in there. Maybe I'll try that with blue. Then we've got our steps here. And possibly a ramp over here for disabled access. Some new lights.
Yeah.
And then, we'd have another entrance somewhere over here.
Just while Robert's doing a few sketches, looking at the time, we've been going now for about 1 hour, 40 minutes or so. I'm proposing when in about 3 minutes time, 4:45, we all sort of pause, especially those who are sort of on video and on audio. Just grab a quick coffee for 15 minutes and then take what we've got here. We won't lose this. We'll sort of put this on the Miro board. And then when we come back, I think if we sort of dive into Site C, what's great is obviously the topics around the highway are the same topics. The church, it all needs to link together. And Gren's rightly pointed out, we have to think about the flow of people. We have to think about the purpose of the area and how people will move around it. But I think we're not going to solve it all today. We know that. But if we come back, look at Site C in about 3 minutes. 3 minutes time, we'll take a 15-minute break. Come back, look at Site C, and then sort of have a good hour or so on Site C.
Sounds good.
Neda, have you? I don't know if you've got any other points or if you wanted to share anything else from the SketchUp model.
I guess the one thing that I just wanted to get people's feedback on was the materials, which we didn't really touch upon. So what I'll do is put in...
So I think we had comments
area.
on bricks, and I guess
Yes.
we had a couple of comments on looking at what some of the houses around the side on Cannon Street Road, having a look at some of the bricks that they used. Obviously, local and natural materials, I believe, was mentioned as well so far. Hannah,
Yes.
Hannah, here we go. Hannah, I like brick. They're coming in too fast now. It'd be more in keeping with the surrounding houses.
Should we switch back to Netta now for the share screen?
Yeah. Just to show the... What?
Let's do that for 60 seconds.
Okay.
And then, and Jim has said using pale bricks. I'm just copying his comments.
These are London stock bricks. I'm just going to remove the ivy that's here because it's slowing down the...
We should probably address Gwen's point. I just as a group that he I think doesn't want it to have any private space, so it's just the buildings themselves.
Yeah.
They're all publicly open. I don't know if people, how other people feel about that, but I feel we should give it yeah. I like them.
Having lived around the area, I think it's very important in terms of security, particularly at night. It's very dark. It attracts a lot of antisocial behaviour that if people are spending their money on this housing, that they do feel safe. So if it's not a gate, if it's not a fence, whatever that alternative is, that people feel, safe, because around that park area at night, it's very unsafe.
Mm. And I would add that when you're looking for housing, even access to a small area of private space when you have small children is very appealing.
Thank you. I'm noting these down. I think it's about finding that balance. It does seem there's quite a strength of will to keep that access to some private space, maybe not enormous private gardens, but having some access to it. I do think, and we've got an hour, 10 minutes today. We're not going to solve the communal issue, but I think there's potentially an exciting communal garden / allotment / walkway that we can look at. And is that communal for the? And these are sort of questions, for the next design and for the community. Is that communal for the people in the buildings? Is that communal for people who live around the church? Is it communal for? Is it just public? It's the sort of questions that the Community Land Trust would want to, I think, answer themselves.
There's also some vote for the later Victorian red brick with white line style. There's sort of the London brick style, or the that later red brick with that style, but it might be too late for that. Or...
No. So what I think we can't sort of judge from right now. What we'll do is on the Miro board after we finish this evening and tomorrow morning, we can throw some different ones in, and then we'll have some different options, and so we can see a few coming in here. That makes quite a nice difference there. You can see. And Trish, you're totally right. Like we just keep trying different things, and what we really want are all your comments and ideas.
Absolutely.
And people are bringing in points about sustainability as well.
Yeah, well, quite.
I think this question that I think Shamara raised about, a number of people have about the safety of the space is related to this issue of flow. I don't think it's just lighting. It's that what you've got at the moment is a space that not many people walk past or through, particularly in the evenings. So hopefully the housing itself begins to do something, but I think we really need to think about the development of this whole area.
Yeah.
And what would enable space to be something that was a sort of blessing rather than a curse? And which space? I mean, the great thing about the first workshops, where people identified which spaces worked for them or which didn't, to tease out what is it about a space and the dynamics of flow that make local people feel safe, and what doesn't, and how we apply that to this site.
And I think some of the key bits on that will be people use the phrase, how do the buildings turn the corner? And looking at these now, we haven't got to it just because I know Ned is working as fast as we can. But actually, how when we zoom into the corner and the size of the building, do we have windows onto the street? So maybe if you can sort of zoom into the bit by the what we're calling the plaza, we've all called it that now, where there's going to be this lovely fountain on this curved building here. Is you obviously want the building to really address the street, and you want to have windows onto that, so that people who are resting, walking to the church, just walking through the gardens, feel like they're not in a dead enclosed space, and it turns the corner. And likewise on the other side, the path that runs between the leisure centre and hopefully these new homes, that would also have windows, potentially doors that front onto that path as well, so people feel safer. There's very strong correlations between streets with doors and windows onto them, where people are living and looking out onto the street and crying. So I think it's now 10:02. What I'll ask is, if all the panel members that we have, feel free to sort of mute and just turn your videos off if you want to stretch your legs, rest your eyes, go get a coffee and whatever, glass of water, have a lie down. If we come back in 10-15 minutes, Robert, Ned and I will be back, and when you guys are back, we'll kick on with I think Site C next. And these designs, we've got all your comments, we've got I know there's loads coming through about sustainability, solar panels, so much stuff we haven't had a chance to touch on. We're jotting these down, we're writing these down, and that's what's important. We can then use these comments to work up 2, 3, 4 options of buildings as well. So if people feel free to sort of turn off cameras, unmute yourself, and then go and have a quick 10-15 minute break.
David, Katie is requesting the mic.
I will try and note. Still unsuccessful.
We are back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Let me just reorient myself with the...
Thank you for sticking with us. I can see we've still got 83 people with us who've held on through the break, so thank you. Apologies for, I know Gren and Trisha in particular have been trying to get hold of the mic. For some reason that's not working. We'll keep trying to work through. I know Sarah, Emily, you're doing a cracking job. We'll keep trying to pick up all the comments. All the comments we are copying down, putting onto the Miro board.
Yeah.
So anything you're saying is not being lost, I promise.
Maybe David or Robert, you want to just show the Miro board quickly?
Yeah,
show
Robert,
just how much.
Yeah. We'll go wake up Angus and Miriam as well.
So here we have the Miro board. Obviously, we'll be, after the session, we'll fill it in. We'll add like images and go back through some of the comments and then keep adding things. But well, definitely some of the categories, especially gardens and green space, are the most popular. Which I suppose is always going to be the case. It's something people are always very passionate about. So yeah, I wonder if we
just on the tech thing.
Yeah.
Katie, who's helping us with the tech at the moment, has asked if Gren and Trisha can retract their mic requests. Hopefully that's clear as to how you do that. And then we'll see if we can try and fix that. So thank you, Trisha. I can see you've retracted it.
Are we still waiting for anybody? Nope, we're all here.
We're all here, and we're just going to spend 30 seconds trying to see if we can get the mic function working. Gren, are you able to retract the mic request?
Perhaps Gren's still.
Okay. We'll see if that works. So, thank you, everyone. I think we're all back. We've all had a quick lie down, had a cup of coffee. Had a quick snack. We've still got 83 people, so we haven't lost everyone. So unfortunately, we can't call it a day and go home. We will carry on with Site C. Robert is going to take over and give you just a quick overview. He's just been showing the Miro board to prove to you that we're keeping track of all the comments. And he'll do a quick intro on Site C. And we've got a few images of equivalent temporary homeless accommodation, which we might have access to potentially, and then we're going to look at the site, start sketching up potentially where these could be orientated on the site, and then after 20-30 minutes of that, we'll hand over to Neda, who's going to again start building this up in 3 dimensions. So Robert, over to you.
All right, so as we're on the Miro board already, just to kind of quickly give you a sense of what might go on the site, are these homeless shelters. So these are some homeless shelters on the bottom here that have been built in Ilford, and it's based kind of on a container design, so very inexpensive. And there's the possibility of getting some of those for this site. And then these are homeless shelters as well in Enfield, I believe. A different style, but also based on containers. So that's just something to keep in mind as we start designing the site. So I'm now going to switch to Street View. Just bear with me while I switch from one application to another. So here we have our site. Again, St. George to the north, and then here is Site A, the highway, and then just across from the highway we have Site C, which is a very large site, bordering Tobacco Dock, which is a popular event venue. Some of you might have been to shows there. And Site C, so it's a very large site, something like 3,000 square meters, I believe, from that slide earlier. Right now, there's nothing on the site. It's been vacant for a number of years, and just nothing is happening, and there's some ownership issues as well. This is what it looks like from the street. Again, just a complete empty lot, nothing at all, bordered by Tobacco Dock. So here we have the back of the Tobacco Dock venue. Maybe just show you Wapping Lane, and there are buses that go along here, so it's quite a well-connected site. But yeah, so that is Site C, and then we can imagine that you could build quite a lot on here at some point in the future. Going back into Photoshop, so here we have Site C. And following up from this potential pedestrian crossing that has been floated in the past, which would be, of course, a great way to get from St. George into Site C. So yeah, based on kind of the options you've seen, some of the homeless shelters, what do you think this site might look like? And perhaps we would one of the ideas that was floated as well in the past was having some sort of central avenue that would kind of lead on from Tobacco Dock to the pedestrian crossing. Does that sound like a good idea?
And that, I think, let's look at the work we did back in summer and build on that, because I think some of the architects, they proposed this vista that went all the way down. I know we've had
I've got that on the
I think it was Gren who shared one of them as well. So it was really important to sort of keep those views from Tobacco Dock through across hopefully this raised crossing to the plaza in front of St. George in the east.
And at that time, we weren't really thinking about what those homeless shelters might look like. So on those sketches from the summer, there's no suggestion of where they might go or what kind of layout you might have. I mean, roughly those containers would probably be about that size on this map.
And Gren, you're right. These are taken from the For the Hill Group website, so we're using the images from there.
Yeah.
Thank you. And interesting, Jim has mentioned that the east side of Site C contains remains of a Roman settlement, which is fascinating. Which I think that was news to us.
I'm assuming it's not this debris that we see here, but could that potentially be a limitation? Perhaps you wouldn't be able to build on the east side of the site, and then how large might that be?
I think the site crossed over into the apartments on the right, so I think we will actually be able to build on it. I don't think it would.
They've already gone out.
They've already built on it.
It might be, this kind of information might be, we want to kind of explore this. Can you incorporate something like that into...
It was a bathhouse, a Roman bathhouse.
Yeah.
I'll just draw a border here for our site.
And for this, we have to remember we're looking now at the temporary accommodation design, not the, what would you like to see here permanently, for the next 50, 100 years.
Yeah, so in essence, it's not absolutely essential to get it right. We just want to make pleasant places for homeless people, and who know, that might be for a number of years. It might be shorter than that, but something that is quite a pleasant place to live. And start thinking about should there be green spaces? Should it be a publicly open space? Should it be a private site?
Yeah, I wonder if it could be towards the left of that space, so it's not impinging on the residential housing on the side, but it's still incorporated in the community.
So perhaps having some shelters built on this side of this central avenue that we're creating here.
Yeah. So that it's still part of the community. So we're not saying that homeless people should be excluded, but still living in the reality that people have their homes. There can be sometimes unpleasant behaviour. So I wonder if that would help with community dynamics.
And thank you for sharing the links, Shamara, in the of the Hill modular homes.
Yes.
And then perhaps we have some green space surrounding the homeless shelters.
What do we think about those layouts? There's going to be that trade-off, isn't there, between how many homes we can provide and, again, green space. You know, we should. I think, you know, we could aspire to create, you know, a private space, potentially communal space that we would for other homes on site A as well.
Someone was about to say something.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Shamara may know more about this, but the part of the partnership, part of what's happened in Redbridge has been around the people who are homeless who are being housed in this kind of project, then getting support into longer term accommodation, which includes various kinds of social enterprise. I mean, in Ilford, Redbridge, that's been a cycle refurbishment has been one of them. But I wonder whether there's something here actually thinking about the sort of route around the housing. It is a kind of path up to Shadwell, up past to Shadwell Station and down into Wapping. And I wonder whether there's any possibility of a kind of container or a yurt, or to actually use the other bit of space for a cafe. I wonder whether that would be. There's a sort of social enterprise possibility there to actually imagine the whole space, building on Shamara's point about wanting the people here to be reintegrated fully into the community rather than, and there'll be support work. I think there is going to be a kind of human ecology here that could be quite exciting.
And perhaps you might want to think about what kind of public spaces you could have. For example, along this. You say you still maintain this central avenue, but maybe you have some sort of plaza in the middle, which is your public space. And then you might have the cafe off from that. And perhaps you have the housing sort of enclosing this public space that you create.
Hannah's just asked a question, which maybe Shamara might be able to speak into a bit about. How long we'd suggested development would last for and how long people would stay for, and a bit more detail about the actual vision for the project, maybe from Shamara.
Yes, so we envision a lease of up to 7 years on a meanwhile use temporary basis, and we're working in partnership with the Salvation Army Citizens UK and the Hill Group. Redbridge have formed something called the Malachi Project, and it's actually in the middle of a shopping centre. So again, it's really integrated into the community. So we're looking at bringing that partnership over here onto site C. So it'll be for 7 years for that to happen. And the Hill Group will prepare the land as well, do everything so that the modular housings can come directly onto the site. So we are currently speaking with our council to secure the land for that temporary meanwhile use.
Does anybody have any further thoughts about potential layouts for the site? I mean, there's no wrong answer. You know, maybe you might want to think about connectivity from other parts of the site. Maybe you want to have access from a corner, for example, and have some sort of access that gets you into the public space.
Yeah.
There was a question, someone pointed out, Hannah Edwards said, should there be a wall or fence surrounding this development or not? I guess that's a good question to see what we feel about that.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want it to be quite a permeable space that people can kind of come in from anywhere? Or do you want it only to be, say, accessible from a couple of different entrance points? And is that open during the day? Is it never open? Is it closed at night, etc.? And of course, that will influence some of these decisions, right? If we want it to be a closed off space, and having a lot of entrances is probably not the best route to go.
And it would also depend on the types of homeless people we'd have in the containers, because if it's street vulnerable, drug use, we would have to really think about the security of the place, particularly with the park across the road. Or if it's more advanced users who, are transitioning back into public life, then it could be much more open. So I think it would also depend on the type of homeless community that would be living in the container. So that's something for us to also think about in speaking with the partnership.
And there are also a lot of organizations that run programs, for example, helping people grow their own food, etc., and helping people integrate back into society. You could possibly imagine having some raised vegetable beds on part of the site.
Yeah.
Perhaps some vegetable beds off to the side of the site.
Yeah. Someone made an interesting point about a doctor's surgery as well.
I think looking at what other services could be incorporated into this, in the same sort of temporary buildings to help people transition and move more towards, like you said, the advanced, stage where, people are more able to kind of reintegrate back into society. And I think, that can be really helpful. And maybe it's, again, very valid for the design point, Robert, in that do we have some sections which are, quieter, more private for, people who, that's appropriate for? And then do you have other, temporary accommodation, which is more kind of fronting onto the street, more traditional in that sense for people who are, further through the process? So it might be you to have different sections.
Yeah, so perhaps you do have a section facing the highway, and then perhaps you have some sort of space in the middle, maybe some sort of green space, which divides that from a more private section in the back, which may or may not be open to the public.
And on that point as well, we've had comments about looking at additional space to account for services to help people transition.
Yep.
So I think, we've got a cafe surgery. I'm sure there's lots of other things that we don't know about right now, but we need to think about leaving space for.
The cafe could have a link to the vegetable gardens. You could have beekeeping or something similar, and they could sell honey or something, that links the area to the cafe.
There's a church in Hackney, I think, that has a garden that's linked to its community there's a link between what's grown and what then happens in the community cafe. So that would be really, really good to think about that as a sort of quite holistic.
And I know there's, ideas of looking at a cafe potentially in St. George's Gardens as well, and can you kind of maybe link the two as well and have a really nice sort of natural flow of, something being created here that's then, shared around, in the community cafe in St. George's Gardens potentially.
It's worth noting, as I think a few people said in the comments before, that there is going to be a cafe that's part of the town hall development, so developing into registry office. So we're kind of thinking a bit about how we could maybe have an influence over that, and that will go ahead, but it's just a case of how kind of community engaged is it?
And we're getting lots of comments coming through of, potential services. Homeless doctor's office, we've got some of that. Social services rooms, showers. And I think this will operate really, well in the sense of having that public space at the centre of this. So in the same way we would treat, a village or a small town where you'd have, a cluster of public services, actually the same principles would apply here, where people know where to go to by design for all these services and for all these things that would help them.
And perhaps then you have some of these services off to the side, giving you a bit, a quite extensive public space in the middle here between the two housing spaces. And I think you do want, feel free to disagree, of course, but I think you probably want it to feel quite an open space. You want it to feel like it's shunned off from the community.
We've had questions about how many stories the modular units would be.
So
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, once we are happy with kind of the plan that we're creating here, what I'm doing right now is drawing everything that Robert's drawing, and then we can start lifting everything up into 3D. So I guess seeing if anyone else has any other comments to make on the plan first, and then we can move on.
And we've had Hannah's commented that she prefers the sort of piazza, so that public space centered design rather than the corridor like design.
So the one that we had back.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a very nice public space. And then of course we could also have the vegetable beds to the back of the cafe here.
And also comments for when we're building the model, both from Gren and Hannah, not to have a wall so that you don't feel like we're excluding people. I think that would be how you kind of treat the boundary is very important here, because you don't want to feel like, oh, we're fencing this off, we're kind of putting this out of sight. It should, hope you feel very much part of community. At the same point, you might want, they might want to, I don't know, some kind of boundary or something to, really show that it's their space, so that people actually have a sense of ownership.
And perhaps that is where you have some of these more private garden spaces in the back here, which would not be publicly accessible, but would be accessible by the people who live in the shelters. Or you have the buildings kind of closer to the streets themselves, kind of pulled back a little bit from the central piazza. And then it's not quite as ambiguous, that the space in the back, creating a larger piazza place in the middle. Does anybody have views whether it's preferable to have a sort of smaller central piazza or a larger central piazza? Of course, it depends a lot how many of these homeless shelters we might imagine being on site. Do we need to be quite dense with where we place the shelters, or can we be a bit more generous with our land use?
We'd need to find out with them particularly how much they would be gifting to us, because then that would influence how much space that we'd actually need.
Yeah.
And then how much you're able to actually stack for the containers. So that information will be very, very crucial, so we can get that information.
Well, with the ones in Ilford, they stack them about 4 stories. The ones in Edinburgh go 2, so I guess they could really be anything from 1 to 4 stories, perhaps, from a structural point of view.
Just to say that the modular containers from the Hill Group are different to the Malachi project, so they're different modular containers. So they have different regulations on how they can be placed, so we can get that specific information as well.
Yeah, that would be good. Definitely, at some point to find that out, and then perhaps we just decide when Neda's working on her SketchUp model what we think works best from an urbanism point of view, and then that can be adjusted down the line if we find out some new information. So yeah, is there kind of a consensus about the plan? Which one is kind of preferable?
Is there any reason?
Go, Sarah. Okay.
Sorry, is there any reason that the access is just, or we're not including the accesses on Wapping, at least on Wapping Lane, which is sort of more access that way, put out to everyone?
Does anybody else have any strong views on that? And if we did have an access from Wapping Lane, would that perhaps be from the corner of the site, or kind of?
Well, I think there's some suggestion to make it permeable, without walls in that sense. Yeah, from Gren.
Well, it certainly could be. It's just we have to decide then if we want the homeless shelters to be publicly accessible, and perhaps how you make people feel safe in their homes if people can just kind of walk all the way around if that's an issue. But
Trish has brought in that the site's on a hill. So,
yeah, because at the Malachi project, the containers are very public yet private. I guess for the clients that they have, so it's very visible. It's colourful. You can see where it is, but then it's not just accessible for anybody to get on site. I'm also mindful. Somebody put it in the comments as well, that actually at the end of the space there's tobacco docks, and they have a lot of events. They'll have a lot of people on that strip at the back, and sometimes at night it can get drunk and whatnot. So that the homeless people are safe, but as you said, not locked off from the rest of the world, and not integrated into the community.
Do we prefer this kind of arrangement here now with access from Wapping Lane? Or did we prefer the previous arrangement with the cafe on the east side of the plaza?
I think we can take. We don't have to make this decision right now. We can offer different options. Work on it this evening, tomorrow morning as well, and then going forward. I reckon if we sort of switch over Neda and start looking at building these up in 3D, just so we can look at it in a different way, really.
And in 3D, we can also just easily move the buildings around. So nothing's set in stone.
Exactly.
All right. So switching to you, Neda.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for that.
So while Robert was sketching, I tried to mimic what he did onto the SketchUp model. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the first question would be, how high do we want these units to be? We have, of course, across the street, St. George in the East, as well as our development. We have here a housing development, which is about 5 stories high. We have the tobacco docks here, which I'd estimate maybe 12 meters high. Correct me if I'm wrong, Robert. Which is roughly about five stories. Here we have mostly empty land with disused bar here. So we're not really seeing a lot of height on this side of the site. So the question would be, how high do we want to make these units? And of course, the higher you make them, the more units that you can include.
That main wall of the tobacco docks, I would guess it's roughly about 8 or 9 meters. And it is quite an imposing wall. It is just a very large blank brick wall. But as Shamara said, sometimes there are a lot of, when there are events going on, there's a lot of people walking there. One of the entrances into the center is on that site.
So let me try doing kind of just a preliminary experiment where I put this up to, let's say, 4 floors, which is what we did for the other building. I'm just going to make this a bit wider.
How high are each of those floors? They look quite high.
These are 3 meters high.
I'll just quickly double check the size of containers.
Yeah, that would be great, actually.
They're 2.6 meters high.
Oh, okay.
Tricia is adding that because there's a development going on in where the McDonald's and the petrol station is currently, and that will be 9 stories.
That's very helpful.
So this site here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very good to know, actually. Just a note that this is not being modeled to scale. I'm kind of just trying to see the massing at this point, approximately.
And thank you from David in the comments, just asking us to remember to use sort of normal language, non-design speak in terms of hedges, walls, not green infrastructure, and ditto with avenues, piazzas, plazas. So we'll do our best to do that. Thank you, David.
And if the cafe, let's say, is 2 floors, 1 floor for a cafe and community uses, and then maybe another floor could be the other uses that were brought up in the chat. So we're talking about quite a large wall of building. It would hide the view from the tobacco docks. But then I guess once you get inside, you do have kind of this very nice enclosed space. And of course, we can widen it out to make it just seem more proportional.
I wonder whether you'd want a higher stacking on the side nearest tobacco docks, because that then creates the possibility that the residents of some of those on that side would have quite an attractive view of the church. Because at the moment, nobody really enjoys that view. It would be fantastic to have people living there for whom that view is part of their daily life.
And Sarah, Emily made the same comment. So there's definitely consensus about that.
So increasing the height of these units back here, essentially, right?
Yes. And it might be you want to, looking at the sort of what we would call the height versus width of that route through the middle, we might want to kind of widen that path a little bit as coming through the route through the main part of the neighbourhood.
Or perhaps you have it wider on one side to kind of sort of like funnel the view towards the church.
Yeah.
And Hannah's brought in that the long containers split into 2, that there needs to be more light to the back of the development. And
that's a very good point. Yeah. Blocks always do look very menacing the first time until you start, when we start to kind of soften it a bit and add materials as well.
Sorry, just some technical difficulties with the block. What I'll do is...
Could we have the front be even lower? Or will we be losing too many homes? As a question.
If you're stepping up on the other buildings towards the tobacco docks, then you potentially could. I'm just gonna for this for now.
And Ray's asked how many homes are being envisaged. I'm not sure, Shamara, if we have, or if there was much sort of clarity on that yet. So it might be we look at this is a sort of aspirational, this is like a phased approach where we just look at one half of this site.
There's also been brought in like the Brunswick Centre and another idea about having staggered different roof heights to create light through the site and things from a couple of people in the chat as well. And again, a call for some. Well, maybe Shamara can.
Oh, sorry, everyone, it cut me out. Sorry, did you ask me something?
Just if you had anything to say to Gren's point about sort of design with homeless people at the centre.
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, it doesn't. So Gren sort of raised that. It's sort of adding that the sort of I wondered if you had something to add from the conversations with the Hill or something about designing with homeless people sort of at the centre of the actual development.
Okay. So you're asking if homeless people get to decide what it looks like?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think we haven't had that conversation yet, but it'd be an interesting one. Homeless people have been more involved in campaigning for them to happen as opposed to the aesthetic design itself. But I think that'd be a very interesting conversation to have and can definitely happen. Within the open table, we do have individuals who used to be homeless, who can also be part of, some of them are online today, and can be a part of how it looks. So yeah, I think that's definitely a point to not just consider, but to implement.
And Shamara, Malachi Palace is up. It's up and running now, isn't it?
Yes.
So it would be really interesting to talk to the residents and the 24-hour staff there, just on their perception in that context of what has worked, what have surprises been, and if they look at this site, where I suspect the density will be lower, because I think Phil's point that there's probably an optimal size of a community like this, and actually this is a big site for it, so it probably won't need to be hugely stacked, but there might be a lot of wisdom learned from that first time. So we've got a real opportunity to engage people who have been homeless, who are living through what it's like to be in something like this.
Definitely. And I think it's quite crucial, actually, to get that best practice as we replicate it over here. So we could definitely bring them on to the next one, or just arrange a conversation to do that research.
So just a question on the, someone mentioned the Brunswick Center sort of setbacks on the buildings. Is this kind of what you had in mind, or?
I don't know who mentioned that.
I think it was in one of the comments.
We have to be mindful as well that a lot of these sort of issues will be limited by, what kind of homeless shelters someone like the Hill Group would provide, and that it may not be possible to have these irregular shapes.
So David and Valerie, who brought that up.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of the audience.
James,
do you have some of the models of similar of the Hill Group?
I do, yes, actually.
Just so people can sort of see something similar to what they look like.
So here's an example of a sort of container home. Of course, I think theirs is they're not made out of shipping containers. No. So you won't have this texture or the fact that it's metal. But what they do is they take a unit like this, and then they carve out spaces for windows, they carve out space for a door, and then on the inside it's furbished in a way that would allow for things like a bathroom, a working area. I think maybe one side's here. So, sorry, SketchUp struggles with small spaces. You kind of see here it's not a huge space, it's quite small, but you have, for example, space for a kitchen, you have like a desk space. Here would be a space for a bed, cabinets, a bathroom here. And so it's really a self-contained unit that is a good space for as a temporary accommodation, essentially. Not great for long term, but that's not what they're meant to be for. And I believe what the Hill Group does is they cover the sort of the sides of the container so that you have different colors as well. So they play around with color just to make it a little bit more vibrant.
I think we saw some of those on the Miro boards, some of the multicolored ones.
Yes.
And there's some that have wooden paneling I've seen as well.
Yeah. And essentially what you do is you just start stacking them. So it's kind of like real life Legos almost, where you could have many units. And then in terms of access, you could have external stairs that go up to the different units. And what you can also do is play around with the, I guess, different directions. You could have one going this way.
Cool.
And as Trisha's mentioned, that the gradient on the site is very steep, which is something we need to be very conscious of.
Yeah.
Saying that she used to sledge down it to Hamlets Street, which is quite nice.
I think it used to be a jam factory, if Trisha told me.
I mean, right now there are some structures or old foundations on the site, so that is something that we'll need to take into account as well. Is do you have to work around some of those existing limitations, some of those foundations, or can the site be cleared and then perhaps it could be leveled a little bit? And just for context as well, the Hill Group homeless homes, they're about 24 square meters. Unfortunately, they don't list the dimensions anywhere. but they are 24 square meters.
So essentially one unit like this could be at 2 or 3 housing blocks, right, Robert?
Which one? I mean, they're a bit more square in essence, and
okay.
And it depends which of the shelter models they would provide, or indeed if it will be the Hill Group or someone else. I'm just going to quickly try to find if I can get the dimensions anywhere.
I'm loving imagining the bridge over the highway there. It's nice.
Completely shut it down with.
Yeah, take the traffic.
But yeah, this could go. For example, in the middle here. Oh, no.
It's great.
Yeah, you could take. Sorry, there's technical difficulties with sketching. You could use the units themselves to create the public space above and below. Then again, it goes down to the question of how high do you want these units to go up? Do you want to create, as we've done here, a wall against the tobacco docks or not? And I guess something to think about is also the experience of people who are going to be using this space, or those people using this street. So trying essentially not to create one, well-designed entrance, for example, on this side, and then kind of a poor entrance on the other side. But yeah, I really like the idea of having like a central space, public space, because while it is a meanwhile use, you can start thinking about the long-term development of the site, at least in terms of the public space. And here you would look at what really resonates with people, what kind of spaces do they like to use, and then it could be something that could stay even if you remove the shelters themselves and replace them with more permanent housing. So it is temporary shelter for now, but there is the possibility of seeing this turn into sort of an experiment for what permanent spaces you could have. I don't know, David, if you want to wrap up.
I think, yeah. In terms of the Site C design, I don't think we'll sort of get it further today, but hopefully we've raised a lot of really interesting different points on movement flows being one of the big topics and how we'd access it. Looking at the heights of the surrounding buildings. Obviously, there's a large gradient on this one, but also just the concept of thinking about the public space, designing the public space and the public amenities first, and then how you incorporate the accommodation around that, so that there's actually a sense of community as opposed to it just being a load of sheds kind of stacked up. And actually just this idea that we really need to think about this being designed in the same way we thought about Site A. And definitely bringing on people who might be living here into the design process. We really advocate designing with the community, so actually designing with people who can be living here. It's going to bring up all sorts of different issues and things that we haven't and couldn't possibly think of ourselves. So that's definitely the right thing to do. It's 5:45. We want to finish at 6 because everyone needs to go and have their dinner. Robert, if you can bring up the Miro board, I think we sort of pause now, look at what we've covered very quickly, just going over one or two of the comments, but to show, we've captured an absolute, enormous, vast quantity of comments, which will help us going forward in this science. What we'll do in terms of next steps is a little bit of design work tomorrow morning. Then Angus, Miriam, myself, and potentially, I don't know who, but one of you on the panel I think might be joining us tomorrow at 11:15 to sort of talk about the background again, but what have we done today? What kind of issues were raised today? Look at some of the images to speak to the wider conference. There's lots of interesting people, hopefully, that are in the audience at other events. house builders, politicians, community members, community leaders, and actually this is a great chance for us to sort of tell them what's going on in actually a fascinating project next to a Grade 1 listed church where I don't think anyone really thought we could do anything. And that's kind of, so if you can tune in 11:15 tomorrow, please do. Rob, why don't you just give a very quick recap just back to Site A as well?
Sure. So we've captured a lot of your feedback from the session, both from the things that you've said and copying and pasting from the comments. So we really hope that we accurately captured some of your thoughts, and also starting to fill in some images, Discovery Walk as an example, both for the massing and the materials. And we'll continue to kind of add images, both from buildings that you've given as examples, as well as the designs that we've done. So we'll feed that into this board. And I guess that's about it. With Site C, again, we will.
Just on site, I just wanted to pull out a few of the things we've heard about potentially floodlighting the church. I think that's really exciting. Connecting to Cycle Sweep Highway 2 when we're looking at mobility, thinking about disabled access as well to make sure everyone can get to their homes easily. We've been looking at potentially having homes which are split, so you can have smaller homes with a flat above and a flat below. Taking inspiration from Discovery Walk, architecture, loads in architecture, design not to have lots of big high walls and no fences, but that balance, of course, between private gardens and public space needs to be thought about, whether you use green walls, green boundaries even for that. Looking at materials, there was a big love for bricks, looking at pale bricks. I know when Ned is sort of mixed up with different types of bricks, that seemed to get a lot of nods and a lot of positive thought as well. And on the green space, the balance, I think the debate's still open. The balance between having small private gardens with a communal space, I think had the most traction. Also looking at allotments as well. Can we, grow the food within the community to feed the community? And sorry, back over to Site C as well, Robert.
Yep. Yeah, so we've had a lot of comments and a lot of still uncertainty, right? We don't quite know how large the containers will be. We don't know how many there will be. We don't know the limitations about how high we can stack them. But hopefully we can find some of that out in the near future, and then that can feed into the design. I mean, we've had a lot of concerns about accessibility into the site, right? Is it an open space? Can the public come in, or would it be better for the homeless people if it's not open to the public? And then a lot of public uses as well. Perhaps you would have a cafe with a vegetable garden. Perhaps you would have some social services on site, a surgery, and then thinking about the layout itself. How close do you build to the surrounding streets? Is the fact that the tobacco dock is a busy, loud area at times, could that be an issue with homeless people who perhaps are looking for somewhere they can recover and don't necessarily want to be in the hubbub of a busy area? And I mean, I think that pretty much covers the main issues on Site C, David.
Yeah, I think we've captured all that. We know that there's a lot more to be done in terms of designing, and this today was really for the first time we've actually looked at how would you orientate, layout, think about how people move around, what kind of services might Site C want as well. In 40 minutes you're not going to get to the right answer. The right answer might look totally different, but what's important is we're starting to hear from local residents and people who are working on these projects to tease out all the right ideas and to tease out all these answers. So I think just to recap and I agree, Granny, I'm sure people do want to stop talking and start doing the project. What we'll be talking about tomorrow, is what needs to happen, I think, to go further. What needs to happen from now to actually start making these things a reality, to start making these things physical. Hopefully we'll be speaking to the right people. I'd like to, just thank everyone. We still managed to hold on to quite a lot of the audience. So thank you, for everyone who's been kind of watching in on this live co-design event. We've we've deliberately tried to keep this, listening to the community voices. So thank you for sort of being patient and watching us. Hopefully it might inspire you to do something similar where you live as well. I think in terms of site A and B, we'll spend a little bit of time just taking on more of the comments to work up a couple of different options. I'll then email that out to everyone I know from the community, and then for all the audience from around the world, we'll be sending out, I'm sure, lots of reports and lots of interesting notes where we'll include some of these designs as well. And hopefully the next step on this journey will start to get a bit more real as well. I don't know if anyone else sort of wants to say anything, but thank you, Angus, thank you, Miriam, thank you, Sarah, Emily, thank you, Phil, thank you, Shamara, and everyone I know, everyone on the chat, Trisha, Gren. It's been fantastic to have you along, and apologies we couldn't get the mic involved, but I think hopefully we've amplified your voice through our design a little bit. Do say if anyone on the panel wants to say anything. Otherwise, I think we'll call this an evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. This was a very interesting experience for me because usually we do it in a room with all of you with us. And something that we've begun to do is to use small blocks and putting them on the map. So to do it on SketchUp has been a much more interesting experience. Thank you to everyone, and thank you for your patience with all of the technical issues. I mean, this is our first time, and I think as we continue to do this, we're going to figure out how to improve it. I think we'll stick to Zoom from now on. Recommendations. I mean, hopefully there will be a time when we'll all be able to meet up again and to be able to do this at the church. But until that moment, I think we're still very much committed and dedicated to making sure that the community has a say in what kind of development goes up in their neighborhood. And so we're still going to continue and try to improve this model of community co-design until then. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, very skillfully done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And just kind of filtering some of your comments and putting them into the design. I guess we have to thank the people who have been able to be speakers to kind of choose the best comments. And we'll see about refining that model into the future. Have great evenings.
Great.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
You've got to leave. Yeah, Angus. See what? See.
here.